why we need more knowledge, dialogue. We have some people for the next panel. Mark Benecke, a forensic biologist, Paula Lambert, a sex and relationship expert and journalist, and Magdalene Trapp, an expert on biodiversity politics at NABU, and Roland Panther, a spokesperson for NABU, the Nature and Biodiversity Conservative Union of Germany. Yeah, well, this is great. Such a huge stage and hall for us. So I have a link to the past. Oh yeah, the bird of the year 2018, Bécassine. And 2014, Sasha Lobo talked about this bird, the common snipe. And so, yeah, that's a nice throwback, right? So, Magdalene Trapp, please give a warm welcome. Magdalene at the NABU, the biggest German nature conservationship association, is where she works. And next up on stage, Mark Benecke. Please take a seat in the middle. Mark once said, biologically speaking, no single animal is as unimportant as the human. And then we have Paula Lambert. Yeah, sit over there, please. Yeah, so a sex expert on a panel on the biodiversity crisis. Well, we're going to see how that works out. So, Magdalena, please, we start with you. Well, this is very exciting for me. I don't think I've ever spoken in front of such a large audience. And yeah, it's great to be here next to colleagues up on the stage. Yeah, I'm an expert on biodiversity politics at NABU. And what concerns me is that we have the loss of habitats and ecological zones on a scale that's never been seen before during the existence of humans on Earth. And we oftentimes forget that, you know, us as humans were part of this ecological sphere. And each time I breathe in and breathe out, you know, you can basically remember that it's because of other forms of life, like, for example, algae, which a lot of us don't think about or even know about. You know, an intact ecosystem that produces this, the oxygen that I breathe. Or, you know, forms of life that keep the water cycle going and that, you know, provide food each day. For example, without pollinators, you know, that wouldn't be possible to drink coffee each morning. And so it's these connections that, you know, are really fascinating to me. And should I keep going? Yeah, and so the big problem is we have this crisis and the threat of losing the foundation to our form of life. And every morning I'm glad to hear the birds outside chirping. And yeah, it's also something, you know, that increases our well-being. Areas where there's a more diversity of birds, people are happier, actually. Yeah. Mark, you're a forensic biologist. What moves you? When you think about nature, what's going on? Yeah, so as a biologist, of course, everything you just said is very interesting. But yeah, I started this series, Time's Up, by accident, actually, where I keep presenting all these individual cases. And nowadays, when we talk about this topic, you know, about this debate about the sixth mass extinction, the largest extinction that happens during humans on Earth. So, even like ants disappearing and, cockroaches, where we figured they would, even survive a nuclear war. So that really surprised me that people who have these strong opinions, who become very angry, sometimes the facts get twisted, sometimes not, but I feel like what's missing is a step to, make the deductions from that. So, for example, a vegan diet, right? So instead of being like, well, yeah, maybe at some point in the future I should, no. So that's really surprising to me that that's the feedback I received from a lot of people that, well, thank you so much for your work. Oh, yeah, maybe the year in 2026, maybe I'm going to, decrease my consumption of something a little bit. And yeah. All right, Paula, you're a sex expert. And so you're also concerned with diversity, I guess. And when we talked before the panel, maybe you want to give us an introduction on where's the intersection between your topics and nature and climate and biodiversity. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Paula Lambert. I report on the topic of sex, but basically what I'm working on is to make people more intelligent. And yeah, so it's not my fault, people. I thought, by hosting lots of animals and people at the place where I live, I think I've also done my part to increase biodiversity. And it's not like Noah's Ark, but I can feel myself becoming more of a Karen as I get older when I see people treating nature and animals in a bad way. And so I'm very conscious of that, and I try to be active about that and to lead a good life. And I hope that humanity sort of realizes, because otherwise it's going to be too late at some point. And yeah, like Mark said, the human is really negligible in this whole ecosystem, but humans don't realize that at all. Yeah, that's a nice transition, because here at Republica we have a lot of talking about the climate crisis, and now we're up on stage here talking about the nature crisis or biodiversity crisis. Maybe we're going to keep talking about the definition later on. But yeah, what's the difference between the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis? So us at NABU, we like this term nature crisis. Do you have some facts and numbers, Mark? Yeah, I'm gonna start. What I found is that when I give talks at large industry companies, corporations, at NABU, at Fridays for Future, or for example in Berlin, we had this huge campaign that the state of Berlin, should be climate neutral. And what I found was that there's this split. So for me, it's not about the facts and figures of, the ecological developments, right? If it gets warmer, then animals don't have the chance to find refuge in other ecological spheres. And so the climate people who care about, for example, carbon dioxide, methane, and the people who want a shift of industries, and the people who care about biodiversity, and people, with a vegan diet, there's no networks between them. And I think that's very interesting. So I tried to like tease them and to actually get them to talk with each other and connect with each other. And so when we had, the mass extinction of insects, when it came out that was actually like factually proven by the statistics that we have, then it was just like, yeah, that's a statement of fact. And so now as a scientist, we're not, allowed to collect samples of wild bees anymore. And to me, there's this giant disconnect of like this loss of biodiversity, and then each individual group has this like special problem, and they only care about that, so to speak. And so these surveys that show how interlinked everything is between climate and biodiversity, I think Magdalena is going to talk about that. Yeah, thank you. Some short examples on that. Yes, we have a climate crisis. Yes, we have a nature and biodiversity crisis. But of course, that's part of one singular planetary crisis, world crisis, whatever you want to call that. And those crises are interlinked, and the cause is us, is humans, and the way our economy works. And so the way we use land resources, use the oceans, agriculture, forestry, all of these sectors play a role in the nature crisis and in the climate crisis, a huge role. And they could be part of the solution. And Mark, you just said it, the way we eat, our diet, if we were to eat less meat, we would save lots and lots of land usage. And so in Germany, it's about 60%, I think, of the land area that's being used to produce feed for animals. So one more example, if the climate crisis, if we're talking about these degrees Celsius targets, if we're going to lose coral reefs, because of course the corals can't migrate, and then there's going to be an oversaturation of acidity, and then they're just gone. And a different example would be the marshes and bogs, which collect lots of water, but like a giant percentage of that have been destroyed over the last few hundreds of years. So we lose. So they set free the carbon dioxide that's saved within them, and we lose the ability to save water.
So, do you know what the last great extinction event was? That was basically the dinosaurs. That's the time scale that we're talking about. This shows you how dramatic the situation is. We're basically looking at an extinction event right now that is on par with the one that killed the dinosaurs. So, I want to look back a little bit. You already quoted it. We have a lot less insect. The biomass represented by insects has been reduced, and we as consumers have realized this when we drive with a car. There are a lot less insects on our windshields. And last year there was an identical study in the UK where they looked at the number plates, and it shows the same results. So this is a dramatic situation, but just how bad is it? The situation is so bad that it's hard to think of it as any bigger than it already is. If you look at toads, they're essentially already extinct. They hardly exist anymore. My brain had a hard time processing that when a colleague of mine told me that 15 years ago. So we had cases of toads that were supposed to be exploded, but it was basically just birds that picked the corpses. And then we started writing an article in a in a scientific paper, and the toad expert basically said, I can't take part in that journal. I'm sorry that I'm a curmudgeon, but I have to cry if I write that. And right now, it basically extended to all the other types of species. The same for insects. 75% of species are already extinct. That's already been a few years ago. But the last 5 years, this got so bad that almost everything is gone already. This year, maybe some of the older ones among you already noticed that. The older ones probably remember that around this time of the year, the air was basically filled with organisms, not just insects, birds, everything. It's so bad this year that it's hard to bear. And even there were some like habitats that birds still could live in within Berlin, and they basically instead of insects had to feed on French fries and langosh and all the other party food, basically. And I'm trying to document this, and honestly, this year there's nothing there anymore. Nothing. I was in the Bijou Park yesterday. There was a very small insect-friendly park. I literally saw 0 insects. That's one of the most diverse clade of species, and basically 0. In downtown New York, I counted 6 insects, 6, and they were in gardens. So I can't come up with a comparison. You have to do that. It's absolute complete devastation. I had a talk with Michaela yesterday. You were talking about ants, and you've already mentioned them before. We all think that there should be plenty of ants, and that's actually not the case anymore. We don't have. You don't actually ever see an ant trail anywhere. When's the last encounter you had with an ant? I live in Weißensee. That's a bit outside of Berlin. I don't have as many insects as before, but I do have 3 different types of ants on my small area, and it's only 300 square meters. I have a few bugs, I have snails, I have bees, but that's also because I never actually clean up the garden. And obviously one of my nicest childhood memories is we sat at a lake, and basically you heard the humming in the air, and now if you sit on the grass, you hear a bit of humming, but it used to be a constant noise that you heard in the past, and it's almost non-existent anymore. And the worst case is that anybody who hasn't actually had that experience in the past, they don't actually realize that. And with this feeling of loss that people don't have, is we basically lose sight of that, because people who don't experience this, they don't know what they lost. We're all in a situation where we're not trying to raise panics, but because the panics don't help, but something has to change. And one of the most important points you just mentioned is don't clean up gardens. Basically, they don't have to be neat. All of the gardens in Germany, for example, is area-wise is bigger than all of the habitations or the natural conservations, and you can do a lot in your own garden. The important thing is you should not use any poisons, and you shouldn't clean up. This is proven. It's not just in her garden; it's everywhere. I don't actually kill the snails. I just throw them over to the neighbors at night. Let's hope that they don't listen in here. Yeah, the poison is an important topic to touch on. Pesticides, especially used in farming in order to produce food, they're obviously a problem. And the NABU, so the Conservation Agency, did a lot of work on that. Can you give us an overview of what your association does? Okay, maybe to take a step back in order to see where this loss of diversity is coming from. There are 5 big perpetrators. It's the way we utilize land and sea, especially with the land. It's a lot of monocultures that we use, or that we have a lot of area that we dedicate to one singular crop that loses a lot of insects and birds. Then one of the biggest drivers is the direct extraction of animals, for example, the tuna that we catch as a species and basically extinguish. Then the climate crisis, as an example that I already mentioned earlier. And the fourth one, the pollution, for example, plastic pollution in the sea, but also, and you sometimes forget about that, the eutrophication of bodies of water. That means you have a lot of fertilizer that goes into the water, but also then pesticides that kill insects and other similarly bad effects. Mark can explain that better than I can, but it's obviously a big problem with the way we farm food. And politically, we set a goal in the World Nature Conference in Montreal, where I was lucky enough to be there. Several countries were discussing and arguing about the goals that they want to set, especially around pesticides, and that the risk and the amount of pesticides should be decreased by 50% and by the year 2030. And obviously that's not a long time to go, but even to just monitor this, we need to know how much pesticide is actually being used right now. And we obviously need to do that regularly. There's a federal agency in Germany to do that. And the interesting bit is this data exists, but we didn't actually have access to that, and it wasn't publicly accessible, even though there's a right to access this information. And NABU then legally challenged that, and we successfully did so. And I believe Baden-Württemberg was the last state that we got to publish that. And after all these years of work, we finally get this data for the pesticides from all of the states, and thus have an initial basis for measuring. But currently, I can tell you nothing happened. Nothing changed at all, at least not in the positive direction, and definitely not towards the 50% reduction goal. So clearly we need more political action in that area. And there was legislation done in that area recently, but it failed. And you can imagine why. There's a lot of lobbying on the EU level by several stakeholders who are clearly opposed. And you can imagine it's due to money in the end. You can't earn a lot of money by preventing these practices. And thus we need to have a lot more political effort in that direction. Okay, let me add something to the pesticides, because as a person that lives, you sometimes get the feeling that whatever you do, nothing helps, nothing's going to make a difference. And clearly, if you've been in the US recently or in the last few years, you can take a look at what the vegetables look like. It's crazy. They look almost fake. She's referencing a French film that had an image for that. The farming methods are not actually able to produce natural products anymore. They try to cheat the system by... I have a blackout. She means an association of farmers. It's basically a farmers collective where you can decide together what is being planted. You get... It's crazy. You get fresh seasonal food that you've asked for. You basically give money to a farmers collective who can then live with that and actually produce something worthwhile. And this is a great way to circumvent this mega industry. And if more people did that, you could change the system. You could bring it to a downfall. I'm convinced of that. I'm still looking for the word solidarity or farming, collective farming action or something like that. Everything else is also not good for the farmers, because they even in the current system they can't make a decent living from that. And there are initiatives where you can take part in this change, and you then try to destroy this farming monopoly, which is always important. All right. There's a large pink elephant in the room. I was saying nope. No, somewhere there's this elephant in the room. Somewhere in this room here, can't see it, but he's saying if we want to pick an apple from a tree, the tree had to blossom, and then ideally an insect comes by and takes the pollen. But if we don't have this insect anymore, there's no pollination happening. So will we not have any food anymore? What's going to happen, Magdalena? Do we have a situation like in China where people manually have to pollinate trees? It's obvious that this is also an economic dimension to it. And how do we deal with that? I'm not sure how much I can say about that. Obviously, we don't want that, and clearly that's why we need to reduce pesticides and get towards farming that is sustainable. And I really like the example that Paula gave. This is one way, the farming collective action. But you can also try ecological farming. They usually try to avoid pesticides as well. And one argument that you often hear from farming circles, so basically farmers saying a lot, that's not a way you can farm. This is not something that can work. I need the pesticides, and this is less geared towards the consumers. They're basically saying it takes more money, it's more complicated, it's more difficult, it's less efficient. That's why we can't just turn everything green and then nothing changes without pesticides. Just keep farming the way you normally would, but without pesticides. And then people think that ecological farming cannot work, but that's not true. I've grown up on an ecological farm, and it actually works quite well. If you respect the ecosystems, if you have diverse crops, for example, if you change what you plant every year, then there's a chance to sustain yourself in this market. Of course, it's a little more difficult to produce at the same cost, or it's going to be more expensive. But if you produce it in an ecological way, the consumers have to actually pay for that, and it has to be accepted by the consumers and not just be forced on that by political change. So ideally, anything that doesn't have externalities, negative externalities, they should be cheaper, because in the end, if we, for example, don't have insects anymore, then everything else has to be more expensive. So what I'm a little sad about is that since we don't take into account these negative externalities right now, the way we would produce it, ecological products are more expensive, and you have to think about what can I afford. And clearly, not everybody can afford organic food, but it doesn't have to be that way. It would be a lot easier if I don't get the sausage discussion here, because there's so many lovers of sausage. If all of these sausage lovers would stop eating so many sausages, then everything would be affordable for everyone, especially for nature. It would be sustainable. And how awesome do you have to, or how much do you have to love sausage to, basically trample human rights in a way? I really don't get that. A sausage isn't that great. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Mark loves that statement. We are at a point where we're here, May, June 2024, from scientific perspective, from a biological perspective, from the way we treat the externalities, and also from the mindset. It's very hard to understand why we even actually still produce animal products. I hope that in 10 years people will look back to this time and will not understand anymore what we're talking about here, that people don't actually eat sausage anymore. This is not possible. This is not just a question of personal sensibilities. It's actually really easy. You have it in your own hands. You just have to you just stop eating animal products, avoid pesticides, all of these pollinators, bugs, bees, wasps. No one's taking care of them. We just know we need a diverse environment, and we would reach that if we take all of these diverse, basically stretches of land that we can now use for producing animal products, and just leave them alone and let them rewild. So I often think that this discussion is already, it's absolutely crystal clear. It shouldn't be a question of your personal motivation. We need to take a decent step forward. I don't want to hear about this and that and that. Stop talking about it, do it, and then you're basically more in line with yourself, you're aligned with nature, with the scientific consensus. It's just one small step.
Yeah, short tip for all consumers out there. Butter is actually like such a bad product. So if you love butter, I love butter, obviously. So a supermarket that's 4 letters, starts with an L, there's a product called the vegan block. And if you can taste the difference between that and butter, I won't believe you. Yeah, I use that German expression a lot about brooms, and actually made some cookies in that form. All right, so we have an agreement up on stage here, right? So probably there's also an agreement between the people up here on stage and the people in the audience. But not everyone out there seems to grapple the reality that you've described so far. And that starts with media. What's the problem with media that they aren't able to communicate the time pressure that we're under? Yeah. No, I'm talking about the Springer tabloids. So I worked for them, and then I quit. Back then, you still printed out the text that I wrote, and they said, we don't want a boss to think that you're left wing, right? Yeah. So, still today, I think that women can be more empathetic. And when a woman came in charge of Springer, I thought, there would be a change in direction, a change of course, and that didn't happen. And so, I think by now everyone has this sort of like bad feeling when it comes to the climate crisis. But it's just like, danger, 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 someone wants to take your sausage away. And I think if people only read articles like that, then they don't come to the conclusion, oh, might this have something to do with me? Instead, they're going to start blaming other people. And there's always the campaigns, for example, with the war in Syria, where, I was in my garden cutting flowers, and people were throwing beer bottles at me. And people were shouting, like people voting for the right-wing AfD were shouting about where's the Islamic State, which didn't make sense at all. And so we have this like common garden where I work, and it's really what that shows, that anecdote, shows that really media has an enormous influence on emotions of people. And I don't get why the people in charge of the media companies aren't using the power that they're given, saying, ooh, we know you're uncomfortable, we know you're fearful, but here's what we're going to do about it. For example, yesterday I read that China is really doing these huge wind energy, solar parks, where they want to create 90% of their energy needs, which, of course, that also has like side effects for nature. But there's ways to, mitigate the crisis that we're in right now. And the media companies are in the position to do something about that. But they really don't want to, they don't show any understanding of the responsibility that they carry. And it's like a evil neighbor. It's just like, that's negative. Ooh, that's bad. And I just don't understand why that's the case. Yeah, I'd also be interested to know, if we look at the audience, all of you consumes media, right? Who of you thinks the media is doing a good job? Who believes that's not the case? They're not doing a good job. Yeah. Yeah, I want to add something to that. Of course, you can do these surveys and see what people think. And what I do is give talks and show the data. And especially from the conservative media, for example, the Bild tabloid, the amount of water saved. That's the metro. All right, I didn't know the metro was above us here. So yeah, the conservative media, they also show these facts and figures. And bourgeois newspaper Die Zeit, they also have these sort of narratives where they quote Philip K. Dick, the sci-fi author, about dystopian futures. And so I think it's up to the individual. I don't want to blame the media. I don't want to get angry about the media. I pick what the conservative media report on, and then I include that in my talks. And I just feel like we need to do that ourselves as sort of a DIY. Yeah, but that's the difference between you and a lot of other people, right? I think most people are just consumers. And so I think media bear a responsibility for, us as humans. We have this problem that we're the cause of, but here's multiple solutions that we offer, and now we just need to move forward in one direction, and then it'll be all right, and we can solve the problem. Yeah, of course, when we talk about more classical media, they depend on ads, right? And so there's this economic dependency. And it's clear that the customers who buy the ads in the newspapers, they're not interested in having this sort of ecological collective So I don't think that's possible. Yeah, or maybe find different ad customers, right? Yeah, or different concepts, right? I think here at Republica we have lots of talks that deal with the question of like how, how's value being generated within the media sphere? Do you count clicks or do you not? And they have data, that when articles that are very well written with proper facts and figures, they're not clicked, they're not being read, and so they're not going to be produced in the future. Yeah, for example, my Time's Up series, it's not entertaining at all. It's just like current news. It's very current. And I read these English articles and then I explain them in German. It's not entertaining at all. But people are, willing to watch that on YouTube. So, sometimes it takes 45 minutes, sometimes it takes 2 hours, and sometimes people don't, finish watching the video all the way through, which is all right. And I think, what you're saying is correct, but who cares? We're here to get off our asses, right? We don't want to blame other people. That's not going to be helpful at all. And so, very nice. So later on, you're going to exit this room and gonna talk about that and share the news. But we have this wish to like do something on our own, right? But then we see like the major economic players, our individual power is pretty small. What about politics, Magdalena? Yeah, to add to that point on the media, I agree that media companies play a very important role, and I think Eckhard von Hirschhausen this morning said that 0.2% of media reporting are concerned with biodiversity and the nature crisis. And so when we look at the extent and the scope of this crisis and how fundamental that might change our way of living, that's clearly that does not correlate. And so I'm an expert, I'm an advisor at NABU on biodiversity, but a year ago I started joining a biodiversity campaign. So I work, in a political field, and from that I recognize that you don't get any successes in politics if you don't, are able to form a majority. And that's where media comes into play. People need to understand the problem. People need to be communicated information about the problem very clearly. And so journalists, representatives of media need to deal with this topic and find creative concepts and solutions. That's not what we as experts, focus on. We're not able to do that. But you have different ways of approaching this topic and to share this topic and make it relatable to other people. And you have your networks where you can find people who are able to do that. And that's something I really hope for. And that, of course, has an influence on politics and political decision-making. Of course, politics also bears a responsibility. They need to do their homework. They need to get better at communicating to really make people understand why certain decisions are being made. Yeah, so let me add to that. So, for example, in the last few weeks, the EU politics in Brussels, what happens in these legislative processes? I don't know if people here in the audience agree with me, but when you think about certain, areas on agricultural fields, there's this disconnect between people's everyday lives and the specialty of that topic. Yeah, so Montreal 2022 set this, these guidelines, the measures we need to take, the goals we need to achieve to stop the loss of biodiversity. just like the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal for climate change, we need worldwide interconnected refugee areas. We need to, and there's also the goal of restoring certain areas like bogs. And then, of course, the reduction of pesticides that we've mentioned. And 23 goals in total. And so you're right, a lot of stuff happens at the EU level, and there's been lots of great ideas there. For example, the nature restoration law, which is still being discussed. And it's currently undecided whether this nature restoration law will be passed or won't. Because right now it's not Germany blocking this law, it's other EU countries. And so, for example, we hope that Austria will also agree on passing this law, and then there will be a majority at the EU level for it to be passed. And that nature conservation law, nature restoration law would be a major step into the right direction. So, for example, restoring rivers to their natural waving forms, restoring bogs and swamps, restoring forests that aren't monocultures. And so a negative example that you've just mentioned are these caveats that have been made on the EU agricultural policy. And agriculture is the biggest part of the EU budget. I think it's over a third or even more of the EU budget each year that goes into agriculture. And that's just decided on that's just decided by area, and there's minimal standards that lead to all of this money being poured directly to farmers. And so now in the past few months we've had these farmer activists, right, that drove their agricultural vehicles into cities to protest for higher prices. And there are certain quality standards about fallows. So each, farmer that receives these EU funds needs to set aside a certain part of their land area to become fallows regularly. And in overnight, those minimal requirements were cut from the EU policy without consulting us, for example, as an NGO. And so that's really it's terrible that from one day to the next, the changes like that are being made, and these goals are being undermined, basically. So when we look at the crisis and the amount of it, and then the political decisions, it's just it doesn't add up. Yeah. So what about the other panelists? Did you deal with the fallow policy on the EU level? How do you deal with that? Mark and me decided earlier on to become chancellor together, actually.
Or at least EU something, EU chancellor, whatever. I'm actually a natural scientist or a STEM researcher, and it's actually much worse than you already said. You hinted at it, but basically these poisons that are used out in the fields, you have to remember the 1.5 degree goal doesn't exist anymore. It's basically something you tell little children. There's no technology left on Earth with which we can still reach the 1.5 degree goal. And this is also true for this kind of legislation. Not just the poison on the farmland, but they're all allowed anymore, and there are experiments, for example, for producing fruits. For example, if you have these industrially produced pink apples, we're actually giving you money to have small strips of land with a lot of flowers in order to have more diversity, and we don't do it around between the rows of trees for the farmers, and then they said, okay, let's put it on the outside of the field. And we know that all of these people that grew up in farming and all these people who try to live ecologically friendly, it's still being rolled back despite all of these people working for it. And if you look at this legislation around the 1.5 degree goal, there's a lot of coincidences. You're clearly not annoyed by this because you're part of an NGO, but I'm annoyed. You need to have so much pressure from all of the consumers. There are a lot of these stickers saying eating is politics, and by what we eat, we do politics. And it's always easier to say politicians have to take care of it, and mama and papa and like your mom and dad, the media, all of them have to take care of it. But still, whenever you buy or don't buy a product, then you influence that, and you're basically enabling this secret rollback of these goals. And sometimes crazy decisions happen. Like, for example, there's an international trade agreement that Trump basically killed, and we said it shouldn't happen, and suddenly he actually does that. We lobbied against it, and he killed it, and it was so secret that not even the members of the European Parliament had to hand in their electronic devices and could only make notes with pen and paper. And then Trump came and said, yeah, let's throw it in the bin, we don't care. So basically the rollback of that happened due to industrial pressure, and if we live in a world like this, we can only trust in the individual in the end. The collective action is so undermined by lobbyists and politics. And that's why you really need to take a deeper look into these collectivist action for farmers. Help these people do their job correctly. That's the only way you can succeed and how you can win over the others. There is only a handful of people who really fill their pockets, and you can collect the levy of the bottle that they throw at you, So we only have 6 minutes left. So I actually wanted to hand it over to the audience and have a few questions by them. Okay, there's an arm there in the back. What is on your mind when it comes to these topics? What do you think are the levers you can pull in order to have an effect? Thank you for the discussion. What really crushes my heart with an iron cold fist is there's always the talk of us versus them. We need to exert pressure. We know we're on the right side of history, and with a lot of quotes around that, we try to have a minimal footprint and to leave behind a planet that's worth living on. But this message has not reached the majority of people. This is not the reality that they live in. And there's the super cheap pork chop in the discounter, and people love it. They still do. There's this dissonance between the importance of the climate and your own actions. The gap is so large, Moses couldn't close it. This is awful. It's just we're so deep into this problem, and with aggression, we're not getting anywhere, and we're gonna lose the 2-degree mark, and we're probably gonna say the same at 5 degrees, and then we're nowhere further. We'll drown. We need to find consensus. I have no idea how to do it, but yeah, that's a good approach. I mean, here at a panel like this, it always sounds like the farmers are the bad guys, and that's not true. There's a lot of them who do the right thing, and some actually try, but they're not really able to, maybe because they have the wrong contracts, or there's a lot of influence around that we can't control. And but no one here said farmers are bad. We just made suggestions, This may be a little bit due to my aggressive formulation, because I have no better ideas anymore than a little bit of aggression when acting, but to counteract this. But this is also where the media comes in. They could play a large role in this fight, and they should tell everybody that it's possible to live in a better way. And this pork chop dilemma is the only way I can explain it. To me, is it's basically a result of the economic uptake after the Second World War. We're doing something that's not good for us, for the pigs or the environment. We need to basically process this problem on a psychological level, maybe. And it's not about us versus them. That's not how. That basically people don't listen, and they get it wrong. It's like in a relationship where you don't listen to each other anymore. Okay, sorry, time's fleeting. I'm seeing there's another microphone there. I'm a journalist. I want to make a correction. It's not that people or companies who buy ads have influence on the editorial content. I'm part of the Wirtschaftswoche, an economic newspaper in Germany. It does not happen. There is a firewall between the ads department and the journalists. And also we have subscriptions, so not all of the money comes from advertisers. So back to the loss of diversity of species. And I'm going jogging, and what I observe is that it's a very local problem, that apparently there's a rule in parks that the grass has to be mowed, and I thought this is a home for some insects, so why is that still being done? Okay, I have a story about that. First of all, I also worked for another German newspaper, and it was explicitly encouraged to write articles that the ad customers would enjoy or like. So I'm living at the Weißensee. There is a nice piece of area that would be great if you could just let it grow, and then people use they basically mow it down. And then people told the workers told me we have to do this because otherwise people would take a dump there. So I mean, this is an area where people go for swims, so maybe that's the reason. But okay, as to the rules, I can't say a lot because that is something that is solved at a federal level. But it would be great that if you exert local influence, so at least you maybe have some small islands in your area where insects still find food. I was in London a few years back, and I had the impression that they do a lot better there. They're probably ahead of us there. It sounded like, or it looked like they had a lot more habitats for insects, and maybe this is a coincidence, but you can sort of, you can join our NGO. We do a lot of action around more habitat for insects, and if you wanna get involved, talk to us. So okay, more questions? Not a direct question, but rather a suggestion. Could you please talk more about solutions instead of problems in panels like these, from a political level, from a scientific level? What can we do? What needs to happen in politics, and also make the distinction between national and the international level. It's important not to let people go with this feeling of, oh wow, I don't have a lot of influence. Please talk more about solutions. What do we have to do? What does politics have to do? What are the perspectives that we can work towards, so we have ideas leaving this room? One last question. Okay, but the question, who does this? I'm a local communal politician, and you can basically talk to them and say, do that, and then you have a park where different flowers can blossom. And if you talk to them, and if a lot of people do that, then you can make change happen. And in the beginning, you talked about not that insects aren't there anymore, and what I would need is tell me something I can do so change happens. And the answer is simple. You need a lot more chaos or disorder. It's anything that looks too clean is probably bad for nature. So one thing I said many times before, one of the measures that everybody can do and that has immediate action, if you want to be self-actualized, you basically don't want to hear it because you want to give you basically want to put the responsibility on everybody else. Just don't use any animal products, and you've solved most of the problem. There are a lot of studies around this. This is basically proven, and the rest of the problem cannot be solved on our panels. There are obviously a lot of specialized conferences but just do it instead of saying we need a better perspective. Leave the room, stop eating meat, don't use any animal products, become a vegan, and then most of the problem is solved and the rest is easy. One more appeal. Please all go vote at the European election on 9th of June. Okay, thanks a lot. Here there are a few pieces of paper that you can use that basically gives you a more in-depth message, and then take the message and spread it around. Thank you, Mark Benecke, Paula Lambert, and Magdalene Trapp, and Roland Panther.